You say yes, and the moment you do, something in you sinks a little. Not because you didn't want to help, but because you didn't actually want to say yes. You just couldn't find a way to say no. And now you're sitting with a commitment you didn't choose, a feeling you can't name, and a quiet resentment you'll probably never express out loud. If that's ever been you, this video is going to explain why. Not in a way that's going to tell you what to do about it, but in a way that might make you feel like someone finally sees the pattern you've been living inside. Because people who struggle to say no aren't weak. They're not pushovers. And it's not a confidence issue. Not really. It goes much deeper than that. On the outside, it looks simple. Someone asks you for something, and instead of pausing, instead of checking in with yourself, you immediately start calculating. How do I say yes in a way that works? Not whether to say yes, just how. And this happens fast, almost automatically. Someone asks if you can cover their shift. Someone needs a favor. Someone sends a message asking for your time. And before your brain has even finished reading the request, some part of you is already forming the yes. Already preparing the accommodating response. Already managing their potential disappointment before they've even had a chance to feel it. That's one of the first things you'll notice in people who struggle with this. It's not that they can't say no after careful consideration. It's that the option of saying no doesn't even feel like a real choice. It's like standing in front of a menu where half the items are invisible. You pick from what you can see, and no just isn't on the menu. And here's the interesting thing. It doesn't always feel like fear in the moment. Sometimes it feels like kindness, like being a good person, like you're just someone who cares about others. And that makes it harder to question, because who wants to question their own kindness? But underneath that reflex, something else is happening. When someone who struggles to say no imagines saying no, actually saying it, clearly, without excessive explanation, there's often a very specific feeling that follows. A kind of dread, a sense of danger that isn't proportionate to the situation. It doesn't feel like you're just declining a request. It feels like you're risking something. A relationship, someone's opinion of you, your place in the dynamic. And that disproportionate feeling, that sense that saying no might cost you something important, that's not random. That response was learned. Somewhere, at some point, that person learned that their needs create conflict. That putting themselves first leads to tension. That the emotional safety of the people around them was somehow their responsibility to maintain. And for a lot of people, that learning happened early, in families where love felt conditional on behavior, where approval was given when you were agreeable, easy, helpful, and quietly withdrawn when you weren't. Children learn something very specific. They learn that who they are is less important than what they do for others, that being lovable means being useful, that their comfort matters less than someone else's comfort with them. That's not a small thing to learn. That's an entire identity structure. And it doesn't disappear when you turn 18. You can see this pattern in the small things, the almost invisible things, the way someone over-explains when they have to decline anything, even minor things. A no that should be 2 words becomes a paragraph, a full justification, an apology, a reassurance that they're still available, still willing, still a good person who cares about you. Because somewhere in their mind, a simple no feels rude, like it requires defense, or the way they respond to someone else's disappointment. If they do manage to set a limit and the other person reacts badly, sighs, goes quiet, seems frustrated, the person who said no will immediately feel like they did something wrong, even if they were completely reasonable, even if the other person's reaction was disproportionate. The discomfort of someone else's displeasure lands in them like evidence of a mistake. There's also the habit of asking themselves questions other people don't ask. Before responding to a simple message, they're already running through scenarios. Will this come off wrong? Is this too much? Are they going to think I'm being difficult? And this isn't overthinking for the sake of it. It's constant self-monitoring, a habit of watching how they're being perceived from the outside and adjusting themselves to fit what seems safest. That self-monitoring is exhausting. Most people don't see it from the outside because the person doing it has learned to make it look effortless, but internally, it's a full-time job. And here's where it gets interesting, because most people assume this is about fear of conflict, about not liking confrontation. And that's part of it. But the real mechanism underneath isn't conflict avoidance, it's identity protection. For someone who was conditioned to be agreeable, to keep the peace, to put others first, that behavior didn't just become a habit. It became who they are. Their identity got fused with it. Being the person who helps, who accommodates, who never makes things difficult, that's not something they do. It's something they are. Or at least, it's something they've been told they are long enough that they started believing it. So when they imagine saying no, firmly, without apology, without explanation, it doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It feels like a betrayal of self. It feels like becoming someone they don't recognize. Someone cold, selfish, difficult. The fear isn't just that the other person will be upset. The fear is that saying no makes them a bad person. And that belief, that self-image, is protecting something much older than the current situation. It was never about confidence. It was about control. Specifically, emotional control over how safe and loved they feel. What makes this pattern so quietly damaging is that it doesn't look like a problem from the outside. In fact, from the outside, it often looks like a strength. People describe these individuals as dependable, selfless, easy to be around. And those things might be true. But what often doesn't get seen is what that person carries home with them. The exhaustion that isn't just physical. The way certain relationships start to feel heavy. Not because anything obvious happened, but because so much has been given without being replenished. The resentment that builds slowly, silently around people they genuinely love. Because they said yes when they wanted to say no, so many times, for so long, that they no longer know where they end and everyone else's needs begin. That unspoken resentment is one of the quieter symptoms of chronic people-pleasing, and it's confusing to feel, because you chose this, in some sense. No one forced you to say yes. So why are you angry? Why do certain relationships feel like they're draining you even when nothing dramatic has happened? Because the agreement was never real. It was performed. It was a yes that masked a no. And over time, those unspoken no's accumulate into something the person can't quite name. A kind of grief for their own needs, a longing to be in relationships where they don't have to manage someone else's reaction to their existence. That's not weakness. That's a survival strategy that outlived its usefulness. Here's one of the most underexplored parts of this pattern. After years of operating this way, many people genuinely lose contact with their own preferences. Not in a dramatic way, but when someone asks them what they want, where to eat, what they need, how they feel, there's often a real blankness. A pause that isn't just politeness, a genuine uncertainty. Because when your entire relational experience has been oriented around what others need and what keeps others comfortable, your own inner landscape doesn't get much attention. Your wants, your limits, your needs. They got quiet because expressing them rarely felt safe or rewarded, and things that don't feel safe eventually stop asking to be heard. This is what makes the pattern so layered. It's not just a communication habit. Over time, it reshapes how someone relates to themselves. It creates a person who is highly attuned to everyone in the room except themselves, who can read emotional dynamics with precision but can't tell you what they actually want for dinner, who gives endlessly but has almost no idea how to receive. And none of that happened by accident. It was shaped by early relationships, by repeated experience, by environments where being small made you safer and being agreeable made you loved. So when you see someone who struggles to say no, you're not looking at someone who lacks a skill. You're looking at someone who built an entire way of being around the belief that their value is tied to their usefulness, that their presence needs to be earned, that saying no might make them lose something they can't afford to lose. That belief was formed before they had the language to question it, and it's been running quietly underneath every yes they've given since. The pattern isn't random. It never was. It was always a response to something real. A real environment, a real fear, a real need for safety in a world that felt unpredictable. And once you see that, once you can trace the yes back to what it was actually protecting, something shifts. Not because you suddenly know what to do, but because you finally understand why it was so hard to begin with. It was never about being a pushover. It was about surviving a world where your no didn't feel allowed. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that awareness alone changes something.